message there. It'll get
Right.
yeah. I recently students have been giving me memes, and that's been interesting. And about 2 weeks ago, I took a course at UCLA on using social media for activism. And I learned a whole bunch of really incredible ways because I'm a union rep at my school. I'm the vice president of the union. I just got elected. And so engaging people to move forward on a movement that's not just let's go protest, but let's actually engage our members, or engage our people to think actively, to protest consciously, is a different thing than just like, walking around, Black Lives Matter,
Right.
if you're not living it, if you're not part of it, if you're not, so it's levels of engagement and using social media, which seems to be the most benign way to get people to participate, because there's not an anonymity to this.
Right.
And so they can stand behind here and you can text messages or whatever to whomever. And so it's been a very interesting, I think activism is changing. Art activism is definitely changing. Artists as activists, you've been reading this book for the past few weeks, and this is all past history. The reason why I wanted Rasheed to talk about this cyber or the internet, or this other space, is because that's real right now for us. So you can destroy a person with the internet right now. I can start a campaign, a tweeting campaign, and I learned tweeting is for news, Facebook is for social community, and Instagram is for getting the message out there immediately to your followers.
Speaking of social media, I'm back on Facebook Live so that we can get the second half.
It's very interesting how the internet, or how the cyberspace is having us connect or disconnect. Because I went to a meeting today and there's like, stay conscious. We want our students to be conscious. We don't want them to have this thing, and I'm like, no, I think we need to meet our students where they are, and they are here. The people are here. Yeah. And so if we don't engage them here, I learned Snapchat, and how to make the messages so that students, I didn't understand, like, why would you want a message to go away after, you see it twice? But then they explained to me how you can use that for activism. I still don't understand, but I'm trying to understand.
Well, your president has figured out a way to use it for activism. Unfortunately, he's trolling the trolls, and his trolls will troll you. I've been trolled by the Trump trolls. I know that some of the things I've done in the past year, like when I did, because I know some of the people who involved with the Black Lives Matter, and when I did my song "A Badge and a Gun," I had Trump trolls trolling me. They were not my friends on Twitter, but they were saying nasty things. So an anonymity of social media has allowed people to also be, on the one hand, incredibly beautiful, sharing the love like we are right now, and incredibly ugly by trolling people anonymously and putting out a political message that is filled with lies.
Well, what I was going to say about the messaging is the frame the frame becomes almost the vehicle for the message. So, for example, they gave these examples that were really trippy. Like, instead of saying tax relief, you would say fair taxes. Like, if we said fair taxes, it's a different, it's the same message as saying tax relief. But when you say tax relief, people who don't want you to have relief think it negatively. And so it's like all this messaging. I've been seeing and hearing a lot of this flip of message. You hear it all the time, the way that things are framed, especially if you listen to Spicer or previous to his dethronement. A lot of his message was, what did he just say? Like, what? Like, you don't even understand because it's so twisted and it's convoluted. But if you listen to this new messaging, it is totally indirect, and it's kind of passive aggressive message that I don't think we've had a handle on yet.
I don't mean to burst your bubble, but I don't think that messaging is new, because
I don't think it's new, but I think we're listening to it now.
I'm a person who loves history, and I have read books. If you read a book like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and you read what the messaging was back in the 1800s, and when people wanted to encroach upon Indian land and justify a genocide against a whole people, that the same messaging was in place. So, that.
But the only thing that we didn't, hang on, we didn't have these then. And this is the change, because the medium is changing. And that's all I'm saying, is that this is changing the way that we're hearing the message. It's not the radio. I went to a press conference, and we were asking the press, how do you get your social message out there? How do you get that activist message out there? And our bubbles were all burst. We were sitting in a room like, revolution. Like, how do we get this televised, right? And basically they said revolution being televised is old. It's old. But if Donna tells her story about why being a single mom who has to live in her car because she doesn't have any money, and she's working this job 9 to 5 that pays her a low wage, and she doesn't have health care, and she's got 3 rotten teeth in her mouth, but she goes to work every day at McDonald's for minimum wage, and she even cares for her 5 kids, and then that leads with an entire group of people behind you going, yeah, we want wages, that these individual stories that they can grasp onto will sell the protest.
Well, yeah, that has definitely changed. What has changed, obviously a lot of things have changed, but the personal message has to be, because people in this age are being bombarded by so many messages. Think about it. Back when I was referring to, the pronouncements of, there were few newspapers, and those few newspapers were like God. I mean, when William Randolph Hearst was publishing his newspapers in the beginning, of the century, whatever he said was God. Even in the 50s and 60s, whatever Walter Cronkite said on television was God. It was like from above. So I certainly agree with you that has changed. I mean, we're all able to look on Twitter and get all these messages that we could never get before. And so I certainly believe that that's something that has changed. But it's also, we're dealing with a more distracted populace.
That's true. So on that note, let's take a look at which one would you like to feature? Do you want to look at, you've got 50, it says there are 50 videos on your channel. So what about Soul Power?
No, they've already seen that.
Oh, you've already seen Soul Power.
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay, so what about we got Soul 24/7?
Sure.
Okay. All right, let's see how I'm going to do this now. I'm going to share my screen with all of you. And tell me if you see my screen. My screen is kind of cray-cray.
I see it.
Okay. And then we're going to see 24/7.
It's an intermittent feed. That's Facebook being Facebook.
All right, here we go. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. 1968.
Can you hear it?
Yes.
Yes.
They wanna look like me, sound like me, act like me. They wanna be like me, dress like me, dance like me. But they don't know the skin down me. And they think they know, but they don't know jack what it's like to be back. 24/7, what it's like to be back. 24/7, what it's like to be back. 24/7. They wanna get down like me, wine like me, funky like me. They wanna move like me, smooth like me, cool like me. Look like me, I don't think so. Skin on me, big bang up. I don't know Jack, I wanna need to be there. Say it loud, I'm proud. Say it loud, I'm proud. Say it loud, 365 days of the year. Black, 24/7. Black, 24/7. They wanna look like me, sound like me, act like me. They wanna be like me, dress like me, dance like me. But they don't know the skin down me. They think they know, but they don't know jack what it's like to be back. 24/7, say it loud, say it loud, say it loud, say it loud. I'm taking a ride. 365 days of the year. 24/7. 24/7. 24/7. 24/7. Interesting seeing. It was interesting for me to see the video played like that, kind of otherworldly like that.
Let's see. Now, how do I get back to our conversation? Let's see. Stop sharing. There we
I can
go.
still see you.
There we go. Stop sharing. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about, and I'll share it again if you need me to reference it. So talk about why the TV set. Talk about what the TV set is about, because I mean today we know that TVs are flat. Okay, so like what is that tube? And then talk also a little bit about some of the images, like why the reoccurring images that you have. What do those symbolize or mean? TV set first.
Okay, the TV set. Well, you know, Vietnam was called the TV war. It was the first war that came into our houses on a nightly basis. That was, I know it's kind of hard to put in perspective nowadays, but the Vietnam War being on the nightly news made it something other than anything that had preceded it. And it meant that people like me, I used to have arguments at dinner with my dad, who was a World War II veteran. We used to have arguments about the Vietnam War because it was on TV when we were eating dinner. The television set.
So the Vietnam War was televised.
It was televised. Gil Scott-Heron said the revolution would not be televised, but certainly the Vietnam War was. And a lot of, especially living what's called up north in America, right? Living in the eastern seaboard, the Northeast, we were seeing all these images from the South, like black people, you know, on TV with dogs being sicked on them in Selma and water hoses in Birmingham. So the television was, I guess, what we were having this discussion earlier about Twitter. The television gave people in the North a chance to see what was happening in the South, and they weren't experiencing it. So it was just something that they was going to see on the television. The television is and the black and white images of the day are important to me because it symbolizes the fact that I grew up in a very black and white world. And there were no gradations of color. And the gradations of color didn't come to exist till more like this generation in reality, because the force of racism was to make everything black and white. You're either black or you're white. Nowadays, people are not like that. You hear people say, I'm biracial. You hear people say, I'm El Salvadoran and Persian. You didn't hear people say that back then. You know? So I am trying to illustrate to people that it was A, black and white world, and B, that the supposition of being black automatically meant you couldn't even go to the toilet if you traveled down south. You couldn't vote.
And it didn't matter if you were biracial because
it didn't matter. And none of that stuff mattered. None of it. None of it. There were plenty of biracial people in Louisiana who couldn't, who were disenfranchised. You know. And so what the reoccurring images? Well, you know, when James Brown said, I had to kind of echo James Brown because he said, I'm black and I'm proud. But today's generation probably doesn't understand what a revolutionary song that was. First of all, black, when people had to actually say something like black is beautiful, you might laugh at it, and today's generation might laugh. Why do they have to say that? But you had to say that in the context of what the country was like, where you had hundreds of years. And remember, in this country, slavery ended in 1865, supposedly, allegedly. I know that in the Caribbean, Slavery ended later. And in Brazil, it ended almost to the turn of the century. So it seems for young people today, when they look at the 1950s and the 1960s, they think of it as, wow, you mean people just got the right to vote on the Voting Rights Act was signed in 1964? Yes, yes, yes. And some dude who was 70 years old, some dude who was 80 years old, he remembered a time when Chinese were working the railroad, when Mexicans were considered worse than dogs, when black people was somebody I used to own. I know it sounds weird to you, but if you do the mathematics, we're not that far removed from this other age. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to tell you. And the African images, in that video, to let you know that James Brown and all the people who live here, we're not black. We're not black. This is black. We're people of African descent. And people of African descent are found everywhere in North and South America. The irony about Americans, and this is what I tell my American friends all the time, the irony is that most of the people who look like me didn't come to America, mainland America. The majority of the people went to Brazil and Cuba. And that's South America. So when I show reoccurring African images, it's to let people know that, yo, you know, racial thing, black, it's nonsense.
It's a construct.
That's nonsense. When you see these people dance, when you see James Brown being able to move like that, I juxtapose him with the African dude on purpose so that you know, hey, that's where that comes from. James Brown was the most African music in America. He broke the European song form completely. He changed it. That's what funk is. And that's why I love funk so much, because funk is African music. But you're singing in English instead of Portuguese and instead of Spanish. Most of the African music.
Explain that a little bit in terms of.
Most of the African music in this part of the world is in Spanish and in Portuguese.
So explain what you mean by, is it a beat? Is it a timbre? Is it a rhythm? Or?
The most African of music that uses the drums, the hand drums, right, is found in son montuno or salsa, in samba, in cumbia, in calypso, in bomba, and all of these different forms, all these different song forms. And since the majority of the people who are black spoke Spanish or Portuguese, then it's an obvious thing for me to say that most of the music that comes from the Americas that's African is indeed Spanish or Portuguese, and some French, and to a lesser extent, Dutch.
So I'm going to tap into some of your, so you talked about, I have another question that's brewing in my mind now that you brought that up, but I'm going to put that on hold for a second. But you talked about the recurring African images. You talked about the James Brown. What about who are the brothers that are dancing?
Oh, the Nicholls brothers. Yeah, they're incredible. They were in Stormy Weather with Lena Horne, and
how did you include them as part of this? And also
because they were very classy, and they were. Remember, you had Fred Astaire, and the idea was that black dancing was supposed to be a little more rude, and they were very classy. You know what I mean? They were very stylized, and they could dance with a top hat and tuxedo. Okay. So that's why they're in there. But the real message of the song is what you were talking about earlier, that our culture, black culture, or an Africanized culture has been appropriated, and that's cool. That's cool because it's for everybody. And as you can, and appropriating the culture is okay, but that song really, it goes to that disconnect we were talking about earlier, where oh, so you love the music? Well, like Spike Lee said in Do the Right Thing. Remember if you all probably saw that movie, when he says, "Hey man, Mookie, how come there ain't no brothers on the wall?" And in the Italian pizza place in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and basically what that was illustrating when the Italian guy starts to talk, the pizza parlor owner, he says, "Hey, Jackie Robinson, I love Jackie Robinson, I love Prince, but they're not black," you know. And then the kids start talking, "They're not black, they're different, you know, they're different." And so as an artist, we hear that all the time, you know, because people do appropriate the culture and then feel like, hey, because you stand for the culture, then you don't stand for any race, right? And that's true. That's, as I said earlier, race is a stupid idea. But even though it's a stupid idea, we've had to live with it for hundreds of years. And that's what I'm talking about, is that what it feels like, you know, my friend sent me a video and it was very deep. It was a psychologist saying, you know what, there's PTSD that nobody ever talks about. And the post-traumatic trauma is the post-traumatic trauma of racism and prejudice. And, you know, when I was a kid, my mother would never say the word racism. She would always say prejudice. And my mother's a very intelligent woman. And she gave me that knowledge, which said, you know what? It's prejudice, because prejudice means that somebody judges you before you open your mouth, before they know how intelligent you are.
Well, I grew up with the word prejudice too, and I think it's only recently that I hear you're racist as a I don't know, a cloak on a person as opposed to your prejudice. Does that make sense?
Right.
How do you guys feel, Miguel or Donna?
As a multiracial person, I've heard shit from all sides. I've been told I'm not black enough, I'm not white enough. The Indian is more recent. I didn't know I had Indian until recently, but I was like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to be who I am, you know, forget everybody else, because there's no way I can fit into any one mold because you said I don't sound black or I don't sound this or that or whatever.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we've used up all the time again.
Oh my God.
No, that idea that you just expressed actually echoes what I had said earlier, you know, which is that if I show people my family photos, and I have shown people my family photos, and people go, look at me, look at my grandfather, look at me, look at my grandfather, go, oh, I said, well, guess what? There's a lot of people.
And I think Donna is saying she wears it, you know, like you wear it. And that's a little different.
Because identity is interesting. I mean, we tend to identify, and right, you know, people look at my hair or whatever, you know, they don't look at your birth certificate. They look at that one. That's we just went right back in a circle, because that's what the song is saying. Is that the identifier? What my song 24/7 is saying is the identifier is, you're black. It stops there, you know, like, oh, you're black.
Miguel, how do you I want to get your input?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sorry?
I just learned yesterday, yesterday, that they're in school, we're not supposed to say Latino or Latina, we're supposed to say Latinx.
Oh, okay.
What?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I think that's more of the
gender,
for the gender neutral.
Yeah.
Who don't identify with either, you know, a male or female, but just want to be neutral.
Right.
But, you know, I mean, I'm pretty light skinned, Chicano, and, you know, I even think that amongst people that I identify with, there's barriers that I got to overcome. You know, I got to prove my Chicano-ness. I got to, you know, step it up, because I don't look it, you know. And then even at work, I work in I work at the Pico Union area, which is, predominantly Latino, Central American. And so I had one of the kids,
Oh.
one of the kids tell me, oh yeah. One of the kids heard me speak Spanish, and I'm a native Spanish speaker. And the kid turns around, and he's actually from Brazil. And he said, "Oh, mister, I didn't know you were, I didn't know you spoke Spanish. I told him about my family." And he said, "Oh, I thought you were just a white guy that likes to slum it." And I'm like, okay. But, even like I said, amongst ourselves, we put those barriers because we just have to put you in a category. You have to put yourself, or you have to identify as something to defend yourself and your identity, as opposed to saying, you know what, I'm here doing, I'm living with you, I'm trying to coexist with you, I'm trying to, as a human being, need you in my life to make me a better person. And I think that's a challenge, that we're a long ways, I feel we're a long ways from getting there. So yeah, that's, some of the stuff I've experienced.
Right.
So we've got 6 minutes and 30 seconds left. And I wanted to ask
back on something Miguel said. In the 60s, for instance, the whole, the buses that went down into the South, there were so many white kids. In fact, most of them were Jewish.
Yeah.
And yeah. And it's funny because there was a lot less mistrust in those days in the 60s. In other words, if somebody said they wanted, like you just said, if somebody wanted to be part of the neighborhood, there was not that mistrust that exists nowadays. It was like, oh, you want to be part? You want to help? Yes. Oh, your name is Goldberg? I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Your name is Martinez? I don't care. Your name is Wang? I don't care. And so I know that as to be personally true. I grew up around a lady she died recently. She was Japanese, and she was the lady who cradled Malcolm X's head after he got shot. Yuri, her name was Yuri, and she was an activist. And she didn't have to prove herself. She didn't have to tell people why.
So I want to ask you a question, Rasheed, before we go. We have 5 minutes left. And time has flown. We've been on the call for about, let's see, what's 2 times 40? 80 minutes, an hour and a half, a little less than an hour and a half. So you were talking about music in Latin America, or the music of South America. And I know that listening to some of that music, if you read the lyrics, a lot of them were protest songs or political songs embedded in this beat. They weren't all love songs. Can you talk a little bit about that? If I know you have some knowledge about that.
Well, yes. The funniest thing is, for instance, the time that I spent in Brazil, and I'm fluent in Portuguese, and a lot of the music, the best music of the Brazilian music, the modern Brazilian music, actually happened when they had, in 1968 in Brazil, they had a military government. They had a very repressive military government. So when you listen to Milton Nascimento and all these incredible artists, it was under the vice of a military government. So these songs and sometimes a very veiled protest, and sometimes that the people understood, and artists were censored. And in Latin America, the music was always like el periódico, la noticia. It was a newspaper of sorts, just like calypso music, in the Caribbean. So the idea that this was the way of telling people what was going on, and while they danced, and so I know that coming from that as my culture has is the reason why I make the kind of music I do. But I know that it is still, other than, let's say, I don't know, few black artists in America, Earth, Wind & Fire wasn't really political, but they were spiritual. Americans don't really understand that the way Caribbean people do and South American people do. We actually understand this idea that you could be getting down and have a protest message at the same time. And it didn't even dawn on me till only recently, when this project started to take on a life of its own, that I recognized that I was actually being very culturally appropriate, unbeknownst to me, which is that
2 minutes left.
Okay, which is that we don't know the blues south of the Rio Grande River. We don't know the blues, but we do know protests.
Interesting. So it says that we have less than a minute. I want to thank you for your time this evening. I hope we didn't take up too much of your time. And I wanted to have this conversation with you like 3 weeks ago, but I know that you were busy. And I'm really appreciating the fact that we did have an opportunity to spend some time with you. Class, if you have any last words for Mr. Rasheed-Ali, hopefully, I don't know, maybe you'll be moved to share his message as part of the protests, and or maybe not. I mean, he has in the back, "I am not your Negro in revolution." I mean, you gotta love this guy, right?
Yeah.
He walks the walk and he talks the talk. So really appreciate you spending some time. So Miguel or Donna, if you have any last words. And
thank you for speaking with us. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you for your energy. There's a vibe you get when you're talking to people who are intelligent.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you. When I was watching the videos, I was in my office and one of the kids stopped by, for something else, and I said, well, want to watch this with me? And he didn't have any immediate thoughts, but he's all like, so what's this about? So it was a cool segue to kind of talk to him about it. That's not what I do. It's more on some other stuff, but it was cool to have that break and to just have that genuine discussion of like, let me pass on this knowledge to you, because he didn't know anything about it. He's all like, oh, I never seen these images.
Wow.
So